here. All righty. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Science Mind Archives and Library Foundation for our first in a series of abundance preservation seminars. I'm Reverend Kathy Mastriani, Executive Director of the Archives, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you here and to be your hostess with the mostest. There's going to be some wonderful information today brought to you by the Archives as a gift to you. And I'm going to start us off, as we usually do, with an invocation, and this is a special one from our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes. So I just invite you to just sit back, take a nice breath in, and put ears on your heart, and listen to Dr. Holmes talk about abundance.
Your subconscious mind is a medium between life and what you experience. The operation of your subconscious is that of a silent force within you, which holds up its images of thought to the universal law of mind, which in its turn reflects into your experience the things you inwardly believe. It is certain that you cannot believe in abundance while identifying yourself with lack. Forget the lack and think only of abundance. Control your mental reactions so that they automatically become affirmative. This will be an interesting and a happy experience, for you will be working in the laboratory of mind with the great law of your being. Abundance belongs to you. Good will come to you if you affirm its presence. Learn to think abundantly. Think of the vastness of everything, the limitlessness of space, the numberless grains of sand on the seashore. How abundant, how lavish nature is. Learn to see abundance in everything, to multiply the good you already possess. Be consciously one with the law of abundance. Expectancy will speed your progress. Say to yourself, I consciously identify myself with everything that belongs to goodness, truth, and beauty. I identify myself with abundance and success, with the living spirit, with all the power, all the presence, and all the life there is. I lift my cup of acceptance, knowing that the divine outpouring will fill it to the brim. Now think of the thing you desire and say, I know that the law of good is operating upon this desire. I know that I shall experience the good which I now affirm. I know that silently I am drawing into my experience today and every day an ever-increasing measure of truth and beauty, of goodness and harmony. Everything I do, say, and think is quickened into right action, into productive action, into increased action. My invisible good already exists. My faith, drawing on this invisible good, causes that which was unseen to become visible. All there is mine today. All there ever was or ever can be is mine now.
So I just know that we are all here by divine appointment for this beautiful and informative seminar to talk about abundance preservation. I know that each person is brought here with an open heart and open consciousness to receive the divine wisdom that's being shared with us by our wonderful special guests. I know our time is blessed in every way, and that people receive the perfect information for their lives as they move forward. And I know that this is just a sacred and holy and positive, powerful, joyful time. I know I just release this into the law, knowing it is good and very good. And so it is.
So it is.
So welcome again. Welcome for anyone new who has joined us. We will be, for just housekeeping, having folks muted, and so we'll ask you to unmute if you're going to share. So again, this is the Science Mind Archives and Library Foundation. We are a nonprofit, and our purpose is to preserve our science mind history and make it available for everyone here. And as a nonprofit, we've been receiving just a lot of questions about IRAs, IRA distributions, estate planning, and more. And so we asked our friends to come here to answer it, not only for us, but to share that wisdom with all of you. And so again, thank you so much for coming. And so the format will be, we will have our presenters introduce themselves. And then Archives Board President, Dr. Jim Van Cleve, is going to facilitate some questions for the experts to answer. And then we'll have time at the end for your questions and answers. And we just invite you to put those questions in the chat. And our request is, it's not like a specific question, like Aunt Mildred had this happen, but if you could just make it a broad general question about estates planning or IRAs, that way everyone can benefit from that wisdom, that would be wonderful. And again, put them in the chat, we'll capture them. So I think with that, we are good to go. Let's do this. This will be fun. So I would like to welcome our first presenter, Ashley St. John's. She's an estate planning lawyer, and I'm going to ask Ashley to introduce herself. Give us a brief bio.
Brief bio. I am a California estate planning attorney, and that is important if you are not a California resident, because the law varies state to state, but estate planning is important in all 50. Law is my second career. I have a background in finance, and at 30, I decided to become a lawyer. So once I became a lawyer, I solely focused on estate planning, except for 1 year where I volunteered as a criminal prosecutor for the city of Los Angeles. Other than that, I was solo for the first 10 years, and I joined a firm called Smith & Myers about 7.5 years ago, and I've been with them since. And now that I'm seeing myself full screen, I introduce my co-counsel, Magnum, on the couch there. The door is closed, so hopefully he doesn't contribute too much to the meeting today, but I apologize in advance if there's a delivery. I'm here today also because I believe in the importance of spreading the news about estate planning, but also in honor of my father, George St. John's, who devoted decades of his life to the science of mind and to the archives. Again, California is where I practice, so please keep that in mind. Let me say at the outset, estate planning is not a do-it-yourself job. It is not a job for you to find a storefront with non-practicing attorneys preparing documents. It's not an online platform job. It is a job that you need to do with someone who's a licensed professional who has experience in the area. Competent counsel helps you develop your plan. It is not a one size fits all plan by any means. You need to address your specifics. You need to go through the different details of that and the consequences, and then you certainly need to address your assets after a plan has been put in place. A note about counsel: if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And if it looks like the price is too, let's just call it too fair, it probably is also. Estate planning is not, you visit somebody, they send you a binder with a 26-page letter about what you now need to go do to make that plan operate the way you hope it will. So pay attention to that when you're educating yourself on potential attorneys that you're going to hire to help you with your plan. That attorney is going to walk you through decisions such as who your successors should be. Here's what we hear all the time if you have several kids. Well, I'll just name all of them as co. That's probably one of the worst things you could do. I could sit here and give you story after story about why that is, but let's just suffice it to say that a good estate planning attorney will walk you through why that's not a good idea. You may have 3 children, one of whom isn't necessarily great with money. And there are ways to plan to protect that child and distribute to the ones who are good with money. All things an educated estate planning attorney will walk you through, because again, it is not a one size fits all process. So what is estate planning? People typically say it's having a will. No, it is having a will. And if in California, you're worth more than $188,400, it's also having a trust. So if you own a piece of real property here, you need a trust. It's having a power of attorney so that someone can make financial decisions for you if you're unable to do so yourself for whatever reason. Having a healthcare directive. And there's a variety of complementary documents that go with those major documents. Planning isn't just for post-death. It's also planning for while you're alive, because people become incapacitated. And so who's going to step in and handle your affairs if you are incapacitated? Who's going to make decisions on your behalf if you are incapacitated? So it's planning for life, and it's planning for when you pass. After your passing, the plan is, how do you distribute things? Where do they go? If you don't answer that question, the probate code will kick in and it will answer it for you by saying it will go to your heirs at law. And that might not be what you want. You might want it to go to charity instead. You might want it to go to a young woman you've known who's been like a niece to you for decades. If you don't answer the question, the law will provide you with an answer. If you don't answer the question, you may only have one living heir, and that person might be in another country and you've never met them before. It might be the Uncle Joe that you've never liked, who's now going to end up with your life's work. So a proper plan will provide for, let's say, your typical situation, husband, wife with children, to the children, grandchildren, if child predeceases. Well, what happens if children predecease without children? Contingency plans for that, and then ultimate contingency plans. That's proper planning, but that is what your trust will do. Why do you want a trust to do it instead of a will? Because a will doesn't avoid probate. And what you really want to do is avoid probate. Probate is a court supervised process to distribute your assets. And if you only have a will and you're worth more than $188,400 in California, that process will go through the courts. Right now in Los Angeles County, where most of my clients are, a typical smooth probate administration where there's no arguments and everybody gets along and there's relatively simple assets is taking about a year to a year and a half, maybe. More often than not, it's a year and a half to 2 years. And it's taking about 5 months right now for letters to issue. Letters are basically the document that gives someone the legal authority to handle the affairs of the state. During that 5 months, what happens? Well, if you have a home with a mortgage, who pays it? If you have children that have means, they can advance those payments and be repaid. But what if you have children that don't? Mortgage companies do not really care if you're in probate. So 3 months, no payments. Now we have other issues to deal with. Probate's expensive. It's based on, lawyers are paid based on statutory fees. And those fees are based on the gross value of your estate. So you own a home, it's worth $9 million. You have a $900,000 mortgage. I'm going to be paid a percentage, and it graduates, and you can look it up for yourself, but I will be paid a percentage on the $1 million, not the net value, the gross value. So you have money that's going to an attorney that should be going to your children. It's a public event, so everything about you is now public record. This all now assumes that you have children that get along. If you don't, who's going to be the executor? You have 3 kids, they don't get along, or now they don't get along suddenly because money's involved. And trust me, children who get along until you pass, as soon as money gets involved, there's a lot of times where all of a sudden harmony is no longer there. So one doesn't want the other one being the executor, so that takes longer and the court has to decide, and it just can become a mess. So the best thing for you to do is avoid that by having a plan. When you pass away, that's a time for your children to mourn and not have to be in court. A trust remains private, and if it's properly funded, it is an easy event most often for most people. Some people with very complex estates who have maybe kids that don't get along, that's a separate issue. But more often than not, most people have a home and maybe some brokerage accounts and some cash in the bank and a retirement plan. And if everything's funded appropriately, which means title is transferred to the trust when it should be, and that's on non-retirement assets, or beneficiary designations are properly made, life insurance policies, any type of retirement plan, then things can go pretty, there's paperwork involved, and it's not just a simple job, but it certainly is much easier. You're not paying the attorney's fees that you would be otherwise. You'd be smart if you're the successor to still hire counsel, because there are legal things you have to do. To transfer title to real property, you're not going to be doing that yourself, but you'll pay a lot less if you have a properly funded trust. That circles back a little bit to you get what you pay for. I have a lot of people who come to me after their parents have died and they paid someone, nice couple $1,000, and their parents received a big binder with that 26-page letter, and they never read the letter because they didn't understand what it said. Well, that attorney's job was now done because they just, they've given the binder, and it's not done. It's done when the assets are in the trust or the beneficiary designations are made. And in our firm, at least, we confirm that. We want statements and proof. We don't just take clients' word for it. And we also keep in touch with you because you acquire new assets and you forget to take title appropriately, and you may then still end up in court. So really important to properly plan. If you have a trust, the will does not distribute your assets. The trust distributes your assets. The will functions more as a piece of evidence for the court. Were you to acquire an asset and not tell your attorney and not take title appropriately or not designate the beneficiary appropriately, you end up in court with a shorter experience. But the will with the trust, what we call it here, is a pour over will. It's an evidence of your intent that you wanted everything that you owned at the time and in the future to be distributed, be poured over into your trust. So your trust is the document that distributes your assets. So I said it handles things while you're living, and this is important because you have capacity issues oftentimes when people become older, but you also have estate tax issues that you need to be keeping an eye on. We are currently enjoying a tremendously generous estate tax exemption that will sunset on January 1st of 2020. Well, actually it's midnight, the 31st, or 11:59 p.m., the 31st of 2025, December. So effective January 1st, 2026, that estate tax sunsets to what it was prior to the law that increased it. That'll be $5 million per person, indexed for inflation. So now what do? We start looking at, if we have an individual, they're worth $8 million, $7 million, and that's not hard to do if you have a couple pieces of real property. Now we need to look at planning. Do we do some lifetime gifting now so that we can cement the current larger estate tax exemption that's available, gift tax, but that's the same as the estate tax. There are all kinds of opportunities, but with your lawyer, you're discussing those and you're dealing with that during life, so you don't leave your children with an estate tax issue. State tax is graduated, but it graduates after $9,000, and the rate is about 40%. So it's a hefty tax that you would rather not pay. Other opportunities for planning during life to address issues of tax planning are your IRAs, charitable giving. Leaving assets to charity is a great thing for many, many reasons. But it's also a wonderful thing for the charity because there's no tax involved. If you have assets where some of it's retirement, but the majority of it is real property and brokerage accounts and other things, you may decide that it's better for your children to designate charity on the retirement and leave the bulk of your estate to the children. And why do I say that? Because a law was passed several years ago that shortened the time in which a child beneficiary can take from that retirement plan. Used to be lifetime required minimum distributions, which was great. It was shortened to 10 years. And why? It was a tax grab. Most people who have children, their children are inheriting when they're at their highest earning years. And now if you have to take within 10 years a retirement plan, you're tacking that onto your taxable income. Because remember, and if you didn't know this, retirement distributions are taxable events to individuals. They are not to charities, but they are to individuals. And Steve will speak more to that. But it's a consequence that you would discuss with your attorney, because it may be that that's a great idea. I mean, if you have a charitable now deduction for your estate, and your children can benefit from that deduction, and you've taken away an income tax event and then done something good with your money. You don't have to do it with the whole retirement plan. You might choose to do 50-50, but these are things you talk through with your team. And your team is not just your estate planner, it's your CPA, and it's your certified financial planner. We all work together to make sure we're maximizing what happens for you when you're living and what happens for the people you leave your property to once you've passed. I'm going to hand it over to Steve so he can talk some about what the benefits are of doing things with your requirement distributions, and plus more money if you choose to, up to a certain amount while you're living. And then I'll talk to you a little bit more later.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
Thanks,
That was
Ashley.
great information. And Steve, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself as well and your wonderful background, and then we'll hand it to Jim.
Yeah, my name is Steve Gabrielson. I'm a CPA, been in that business for about 50 years. Also for about 17 years, my wife and I had a center here in Orange County. So a lot of people know me from that. Estate planning and trust planning has been part of my expertise since 1975. At one time, I was on the speaking circuit around the country. I wrote a book on estate planning at one point, and for 12 years, I was on the committee with the American Institute of CPAs that put on the annual estate planning conference. I'd like to make just give 3 or 4 quick examples, and then I'll talk a little bit about IRAs. I don't know what the percentage is right now today, but at one time, the percentage was 70% of the people in the United States do not have an estate plan. John Wayne, whose boat was parked just down the street from where I am right now in Newport Beach, had a will, but his trusts were not funded. So his estate went to probate. I think the probate took 6 years. There was a lot of controversy. I believe the fees were $250,000, and he paid $6 million in estate taxes. A lot of that delay and expense could have been avoided with just a few further steps on his estate plan. There was a very famous judge in Orange County. Her name is Betty Lamoureux. She's the only judge in Orange County, California that has a building named after her. And she retired from Superior Court. She was the first woman judge in the Orange County Superior Court. She retired about 20 years after she retired. She came down with Alzheimer's. And after she came down with Alzheimer's, she signed a one-page document that changed who would manage her estate. And that ensued a 3-year court battle with her relatives, $500,000 worth of attorney's fees that could have been all avoided. Karen Quinlan, who was a name some of you will recognize from maybe 20 years ago when she passed away, she was drank too much at one point. I think she was in college, and she was in a coma for 13 years. She lived in Texas, and she did not have an advanced healthcare directive. So nobody legally could come in and say who was supposed to pull a plug, so to speak. While she was in her coma, she went bankrupt. Her parents went bankrupt, and their lives were destroyed over not having one document that would just name who had her healthcare powers. So I want to talk about IRAs a little bit. We could probably have an 8-hour seminar on IRAs. They seem to be pretty simple, but actually they're not. They were when they were first created, but there's so many rules now. There were estate and retirement planning rules that were changed again just at the end of last year. There was 93 changes. The laws change all the time. So I'm not going to give you a lot of specifics on code sections and stuff like that because you won't remember them. I have trouble remembering them myself. And we do this every day, but you have what's known as a regular IRA. You have a Roth IRA. We're not going to talk about Roths. So regular IRAs, if you have one, as Ashley mentioned earlier, at some point you have to start taking distributions. And that rule has been changed recently. It used to be 70.5 years old, and it's now 73. That was one of the law changes at the end of last year. I want to give you kind of a simple tax planning strategy here, which is becoming more popular because it's becoming more well known. There's been a gigantic increase in this strategy, use of this strategy in the last year or two. It's what's known as a qualified charitable deduction. A lot of people that are retired don't itemize deductions anymore because they don't have a home mortgage, etc. But they still want to make charitable contributions. And if you make charitable contributions that don't get your deductions up above the standard deduction amount that you're already taking, then basically you don't get a tax deduction for it because the standard deduction is what you're using. So if you do what's known as a qualified charitable deduction, you can avoid that. In fact, I went to memorial service yesterday of one of my clients that I've had for about 30 years, and he used the qualified charitable deduction more than anybody I've ever known, making contributions to UCLA and several large charities down here in Orange County. And what that entails is having the required minimum distribution that you're supposed to take every year, or you can even go beyond that. And you basically make an election and coordinate a little bit of paperwork with the custodian. And the money goes directly from your IRA to the qualified charitable entity that you're sending it to. You don't get a deduction on your itemized deductions, but you don't have to pick up the IRA income as income. And as Ashley mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't know this or understand it. IRA proceeds are always taxable to whoever receives them, whether you're still alive and you start taking distributions, or you die and you leave it to a trust. The trust could pay taxes, or if you leave it to relatives, a spouse, children, what have you, they will pay taxes too. There is no such thing as what's called a step up in tax basis for an IRA. It's known under the tax code as income in respect of the decedent. So this is a tax strategy that's widely used now to to comply with taking the required minimum distributions. Why do you want to comply with the required minimum distribution rule? Well, the rule used to be, up until last year, if you didn't take out the proper amount, there was a 50% penalty. Now the rule has been reduced to 25. That was 25%. That was one of the law changes at the end of last year. So you want to make sure that you comply with the required minimum distributions, but this is a way that you can comply with it, take out the money you're supposed to, and if you want to donate it to charity, have it go directly to the charity. You don't pay taxes on the retirement distribution. The charity gets the money. Everybody's happy. It is noted on your return, on the front page of your return. It shows you got the money, and then it shows that it's not taxable. So I'll turn it back to Jim for any other questions that you may want to go through here. Jim, you're on mute.
All right, is that better? Yeah, I'm Jim Van Cleve. I'm the president of the board of directors of the archives, and thank you, Ashley and Steve, for making. Obviously, it is not a simple process, but I know it can be simple in that if you have an IRA at a bank or a brokerage or however you have it, to actually authorize the expenditure to a charity, that is really a pretty simple thing, remarkably simple. And you don't have to get I don't believe you have to get your approval from the beneficiaries. I mean, you just do it. You don't even have to tell your spouse.
Correct.
And it's like a 5-minute conversation with your broker or your and you can do it multiple times a year. You can do it every year. You can set it up to it, and then you don't pay taxes on it. The heartbreaking thing for me is that for people that say, okay, I'm going to take the distribution, I'll just send it to the charity, and then by the time they get to their taxes being prepared, why the CPA says, hey, you're below the standard deduction, and so don't bother with that charity deduction. You can't take it. Now that seems to me like a big waste, and I know we're going to talk about, and how you avoid that is you make the direct distribution from the what is it called? QCD or whatever.
Qualified
anyway,
charity.
But some of the questions that we kicked around, and we need more questions. Feel free to ask them about anything, especially about IRAs. The question, I don't think it could be said. I know you both said it, and it's something that needs to be said over and over and over, and that is, if you say, okay, I'm not going to bother handling the IRA, I'm just going to let the kids do it. And as Steve said, when you have an ordinary in your will, a house or something like that, would you call it the step up, in that basically there's no immediate taxes due on inheritance, but an IRA is entirely different, right? I mean, those taxes, it's like the old death and taxes story. It's you simply can't. The only way you can avoid it is to give it to a charity. But Steve, I think when we say IRA, that's individual, and that individual means you're the boss,
Right.
Not your wife, not your beneficiaries, but you're the boss. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what happens if you go to probate, what does the probate do with IRAs?
I'm gonna let Ashley respond to that one. Ashley, want to take that one?
Sure. If it depends on each institution's rules, but if there is not a designated beneficiary on a retirement account, and you should check your accounts. I cannot say that enough because everybody thinks that they designated a beneficiary when they created the account, and I will confirm that that is not the truth. So if there's one thing you do from this phone or this meeting today is take a little bit of time, go through your retirement assets and your life insurance policies, if you have any, and make sure you have a beneficiary designation on there, not just a primary, but also a contingent. Because if you do primary only, the estate may be the contingent. And if the primary predeceases you, now you're in probate court. And now we have to go through the process of, do you have a document saying who the executor would be? If not, is there someone who will be what we'd call the administrator? Same job, different title, because one you died with a will, one you died with a trust. Without a will. If you had a trust, 99% of the time, your executors in your trust are the same as your successor trustees. So same person's going to be appointed, but you're going to wait a long time for someone to be able to have the legal authority to deal with the financial institution and distribute that asset, determine who now the beneficiaries will be. If it's the estate, well, that means it's heirs at law. Who are the heirs? We have to then set up inherited IRAs, because what happens with an IRA is it becomes a separate asset that's owned by, whether it's the children or the surviving spouse. There is a little bit of an exception with surviving spouses, because you have to name your surviving spouse on most retirement plans unless the spouse waives that. That's just the law. So on certain plans, you'll at least have the surviving spouse, or it would go to that person first. But if there isn't one, you're just looking at a nightmare that you could have avoided by now online. You just log into your account. You can call your financial planner, confirm the benefit, and get it in writing. Don't just let them say, oh yeah, we did that, and this is who I'm showing. Say, excellent. Send me by email a PDF showing confirmation of the beneficiary designation. Put it in your file. Because then someday, if that financial institution ever says, oh no, there's no beneficiary, we never processed that paperwork, guess what? Your heirs get to pull out. Here's confirmation of it. So you do your due diligence and check your beneficiary designations. But to answer the question is, you go to probate and now you're paying lawyers' fees, you're waiting time, you're having a public record event, all that could have been avoided by dedicating a half an hour on a Saturday to making sure that your beneficiary designations are properly made.
Yes, all right. One of the questions that does pop up has got to do with your trust. I guess this is an Ashley question, maybe. Will a trust handle your IRA?
Only if you've decided to designate the trust as the beneficiary. Why would you do that? You and your spouse are in your early 40s and you have young children. Nobody knows when children are young what their financial acumen will be someday. We don't know if they'll live long enough or if they'll outlive you even. And in the trust, like I mentioned earlier, we always have contingency plans. Now, there has to be specific language in the trust in order to designate the trusted beneficiary, which is why you use a lawyer and don't do it yourself. But that might be the appropriate decision depending on a family's circumstances. You might have children that are older and you know they're doing great. Your wife has predeceased you, so you're going to name your children. And then you're going to ask your institution, what do I do for contingency plans? There's a legal term called per stirpes. Many financial institutions say, okay, my child, Mike Smith, per stirpes. What is per stirpes? It's a contingency plan. If Mike isn't alive when this kicks in because he died before me, now that financial institution is going to look and see, did Mike have children? Did Mike have grandchildren? And is going to look for heirs of Mike, which is what would be in your trust as a contingency plan more often than not. So you need to look into that. But yes, sometimes you designate the trust. It's a case-by-case basis and analysis. Documents need to be properly drafted to do that. Otherwise, if it's appropriate, as in the example I just gave, spouse first, obviously on most plans, and then children would be contingency, maybe per stirpes, depending on if that's appropriate. It might be partially charity because, as we discussed earlier, it's a wise decision to leave the bulk of your assets to the kids and have the retirement plan go to a charity. I do want to circle back to one phrase that Steve used, which was step up, and you referred to it, and Jim's referred to it. Because it is important to understand that, yes, retirement assets are income taxable events to whomever is receiving the funds. But step up in basis is not allowed with retirement, but it is, at least in the law as it stands now, available for the people that you leave your property to. So mom and dad are gone and 3 children are going to receive the house and a $500,000 brokerage account and a $300 checking savings combined. Let's just leave it that simple. What happens with the house? In California, I won't get into it much, but we passed Proposition 19, which really reduced the opportunity for a parent to leave to their children their primary residence without property tax reassessment. I have a lot to say on that issue, but suffice it to say what it has caused is many people's primary asset, their opportunity to do some generational wealth building, that's going to now be sold because a lot of the time kids cannot handle the additional requirement of the now reassessed property. If that's a $2 million house, that's a $20,000 tax bill. And if it's one child or 2 children, maybe they can't handle that. Now, there's an exception to that I won't get into that involves a child moving in, still probably going to be reassessed on part of it. That's a mathematical equation. But more often than not, homes are being sold now. And that's just a shame because, again, it was an opportunity to pass along your wealth. So step up in basis. What is that? When you get, a lot of people think, oh, I'll just add my children as joint tenants. That's my estate planning because when I die, they get the asset. And that's true, but they get the asset with your basis. What is your basis? It's what you paid for it. So when you bought it in 1970 for $38,000, that's your basis. Now, sure, if there's any capital improvements, we can work on adjusting that a bit, but you're giving them your basis. Now, if they don't want the house and they go to sell it, what do they pay? Capital gains tax. Because when you bought it for $38,000 and it's now worth $1.5 million because you did your planning by adding them as a joint tenant, they're now selling it and going to pay capital gains tax on the difference between the fair market value, date of death sales price, and the basis, your basis. So massive mistake. What happens when they inherit it? They inherit it at the fair market value at the date of your death. What does that mean? It means the basis in the property steps up to the fair market value at your date of death. And if within 6 months, because either the kids can't afford the property tax increase or just don't want the house, within 6 months, the IRS will accept the sales price of the home. as the fair market value at date of death, and there'll be absolutely no capital gain. So that's what step up means when we're talking about step up. Again, it does not apply to IRA distributions, but it does apply to your other assets. So it would also apply to your stocks. You know, you have Apple stock from 89. Your basis is going to be pretty low. Great for the kids that all $300,000 of that Apple stock is the date of death value, because now they can make an educated decision about, do we diversify? The only reason mom and dad didn't sell it is because they didn't want to pay capital gains on it. But now that it's the kids and they take that asset at the value when you passed, now they make the decision, do we diversify and not have everything consolidated in one stock, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what step up is. And sorry for the long answer, but I feel like that's an important thing to know when you're thinking about your planning.
I'd like to just add one thing there, if I could.
Mm.
Ashley mentioned it, but I just want to reinforce it. If you have a trust as a beneficiary on an IRA, you have to make sure the attorney that you're working with that does that trust really knows what they're doing. That is a very sophisticated issue that can go sideways easily. And I'm just going to throw in a quick example of difference between a qualified attorney and a non-qualified attorney. At one point in my career, when we first came to California, I had an attorney come in and he said, you know, I just retired. I don't know anything about estate planning, but I'm going to kind of do a little bit, you know, during my retirement here. And here's my first project. I wanted you to look at it because you have a reputation. So just take a look at what I did here. I pulled the book off the shelf. I only changed a couple words in it, but I think it's pretty good. And I looked at it for 5 minutes and I said, at that time, the estate and gift tax law were not integrated. I said, by changing those two words, basically what you've done is double the taxable estate of the people that you just did this for. And this is his first attempt to ever do anything. He said, what should I do? And I said, well, I'm not an attorney, but what I would tell you to do is go get every copy of everything that was signed and shred it, and don't do any more estate planning for anybody. Don't know what you're talking about. His face turned pale. He left my office. I never heard from him again. But that was a disaster that he created by taking the book off the shelf and changing a couple words. And that's an absolute true story. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Jim.
Wow. We have a question here from Reverend Steve, the other Steve, and maybe this is an easy one. He says, I have a traditional and a Roth IRA. If I want to withdraw from one of them, what are the consequences of each and the taxable event?
Well, the quick answer is you withdraw money from the regular IRA, it's going to be taxable. If you withdraw it from the Roth and you meet certain other qualifications, it's going to be non-taxable. Agree with that, Ashley?
Yes, absolutely. Roth, you pay your tax, it's a post-tax event, right? So you contribute to a Roth after you've paid your income taxes, which is why you don't pay income taxes on it when you take from it. But like Steve said, there are certain guidelines under which you take the appropriate amount so that it's a non-taxable event.
But it seems to beg the question, if I withdraw from my Roth and give it to a charity, that is deductible on your itemized, isn't it?
Yeah, it would be deductible, but I don't know that's considered to be, that's not one of your top 10 tax planning
Right. That's not why you have a Roth.
strategies, because you're taking it from an asset that's non-taxable to you to begin with.
Right.
The better strategy is take it from your regular IRA.
Right.
Okay.
You don't want to lose any non-taxable positives that you've worked hard for during your life. And the chances are, if you have a Roth, you also have a traditional IRA, because most people don't just have a Roth.
All right. Wow. Well, Reverend Kathy, how's our timing going here?
Well, we have about 10 minutes to go for our entire thing. So maybe like 5 more minutes of these wonderful questions and answers. If there's anything else from our studio audience here, if you could put it in the chat, we'd love to hear from you. And
One
obviously,
thing you haven't covered, which I'm going to just jump in and make sure we do, and Ashley can cover this, but one of the issues is what type of charity can you use this tax strategy to, the qualified charitable deduction? What type of charity would qualify for that? So Ashley, you want to address that?
501c3 charities. That's in the tax code. So if, your neighbor down the street, Dana, has her own little private adoption care facility for dogs because she's a lovely woman who cares for dogs, writing Dana a check or giving Dana the distribution does nothing for you with your relationship with the IRS, but giving to a qualified 501c3 charity does. So be sure to look at that. More often than not, you can Google them online. FEIN, Federal Employer Identification Number, FEIN. Everybody has one. We do. They're called Social Security numbers. And all charities have a tax ID as well. So you can Google FEIN, City of Hope, FEIN, Dogs for Disabled Veterans, whatever, your parish, whatever charity you're wanting to find out. Do they have, if they have that tax ID number, they're a 501c3 or another qualified charity. But they'll also put it right there on their website. We are a 501c3 because that is a red flag or flashing red lights to everybody that you can take advantage of the tax opportunities available to you if you would like to give us money.
Okay, here's another question from Reverend Martha. We have an inherited IRA. Are we also able to give directly to a charity and not incur a tax?
Yeah, I'll go first on that and see if Ashley has anything to add to it. But you have to be in required minimum distribution mode to do this. So you have to be over 70 and a half for that, even though the age has now been raised to 73. That's one thing that happens in the tax code. They change one part, but they leave the ages, But so if you're in required minimum distribution mode, you can do that. You agree with that, Ashley?
Yes. Yes.
And if you're not, you can't, I take it.
Correct.
The only difference between inherited and non-inherited is you obtained that asset from someone who designated you as the beneficiary, and financial institutions will describe it as such in the title of the asset, but it's no different than another retirement, another IRA. It's just that you inherited it. So that's why the title looks different.
Now you can contribute more than the minimum.
Yes, you can. You contribute. You could actually contribute up to $100,000 a year from using this qualified charitable strategy, qualified charitable deduction strategy. But again, you have to be in required minimum distribution mode. You can't, if you're 60 years old and you're now able to take money out of your IRA, but you're not required yet to take it out, then you can't do it.
And if you decide to give the $100,000 to a charity, do you have to? Is there any obligation with your beneficiary?
I'll let Ashley.
Only if it's your spouse, unless the spouse has signed a waiver. Your beneficiaries have certain circumstances, people of great wealth, there are irrevocable trusts and other types of trusts that are set up that don't apply to 98% of us. So most of us, our beneficiaries are entitled to nothing. So live it up. Don't think you have to save it, because you don't. I have to talk clients into spending their money in their late 70s and 80s because they're so worried about leaving it to their kids, but they've put them all through college and all their kids are doing well, and maybe they're not. So why would they deserve to get all of it? The money is there for you while you're living, so you should spend your money. And if there's something left for your children, what a wonderful thing, right? But you have absolutely no obligation to give it to your children. So if you don't like them, don't leave them anything. Hopefully you do, but they have no control over that. They only are entitled to, if you've so chosen or you've not done an estate plan, what you've left behind after you and your spouse pass away.
Great, fantastic. Okay, I think, by the way, Ashley and Steve, thank you for those incredible and valuable
Well,
explanations of something that almost everybody finds quite complicated.
Pleasure.
Made a lot of sense out of such a thing. So we then need to, we promised we would take an hour, and we need to wrap up. It would, well, Kathy, do you want to, is this your piece of it?
Perhaps, but I just want to say that you can tell there's a lot of information here out there, a lot of questions out there too. And so we will be having a couple more seminars coming up, but at this point we want to thank Ashley and Steve for their time.
Pleasure. Good to see you, Steve, and good to see you, Jim, Kathy.
Thank you both, and I think we agreed for you to excuse yourself while we talk about the archives.
I can't tell if Marilyn's still on, but Marilyn, I'll talk to you soon.
thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
And so we're just going to take a couple minutes and talk about the Science of Mind archives now. And again, wasn't that amazing? That was just a lot of information, and I love the stories that they told as well. And so, and as our experts informed us, about estate planning and IRAs and charities, but again, there's so much more. So we will be continuing this conversation. And the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation specifically is a true qualified charity. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. And a lot of folks may not realize that we are a separate nonprofit from Centers for Spiritual Living Home Office. And so we're responsible for our own operations and everything we do to preserve, protect our history. So we truly are a living resource of sacred wisdom. What we do here is we're digitizing things that were in boxes, old and dusty things, and then we bring it to life, just like this book, Ernest Holmes at Asilomar, that we recently released. And all contributions to the Science of Mind archives really support the important work we're doing. And I will pass it to Jim.
Yes, and as you heard from the opening prayer of Ernest Holmes, that's what we do. We have a lot of tapes, and these tapes most of them are from the 50s, and they are rapidly deteriorating. So we're kind of in a bit of a rush, and we've just gotten started on all the tapes we have. We also have tapes from some of the more prominent ministers, some famous ministers. Here locally, we have Peggy Bassett and Frank Richelieu, who both had megachurches back in the 80s and 90s. And there are tapes that need to be digitized. And we also transcribe. That was the book on the Asilomar. We actually have a process whereby we take the tape and turn it into the written words so you can read it. And let me just say that I'm a theologian by nature and or by training. But things change. I mean, there has been some development of Ernest Holmes' thinking from 1917 to 1961 when he passed, and that's awfully exciting stuff to me. So our mission, whether we talk about the how's it go, Kathy, with the wisdom?
That we preserve, protect, and present our science of mind, philosophy, and wisdom.
Yeah, that's the mission, but you also have the vision statement about sanctuary for wisdom or something like that.
I know we had a visioning in 2020, and it talks about the Science Mind Archives is a living resource of sacred wisdom. It's engaging, interactive, and experiential. We work in partnership with Centers for Spiritual Living Home Office to advance the mission and goals of both organizations, but we're using modern technology and media, which offers dynamic opportunities, unique products, and valuable services for all of you, for students and practitioners of science of mind. It's really exciting and engaging. And right now we're in a point where CSL is selling the building that we're located in, and we're getting ready to move. And so that's another wonderful opportunity for us. And so we really want to encourage you to look in your heart, and if it's for your IRA, the distributions, your will or estate planning, to consider putting the Science of Mind Archives as a beneficiary. That would just really support all that we're doing to protect our history for each one of us and for generations to come.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. But so most of our costs, a great deal of our costs are in the so-called presentation. That is, getting the word of Ernest and other religious science teachers out into the entire New Thought community, as well as beyond that. So that is our ongoing cost. The right now, because of the move, and the move is impending at probably early next year, might be as early as January or February. It's going to be quite costly. We have a fundraising activity where we need to raise $150,000 in order to cover the cost of the move. And we're not quite halfway there. I guess we're between a third and a halfway there. We've had some matching funds. They're very important. A matching fund means that if you give us $100, it's worth 200. And so it kind of like it doubles your money. So that is our activity right now. The nice thing about IRA distributions is they're immediate. Nobody has to die. That's sort of a long-term thing, and it's very important, but it's a long-term thing. But the short, immediate-term thing is a phone call to your somebody mentioned Vanguard or whoever and said do it. I forget who that was in the chat, but that's exactly right. It's a 5-minute conversation between you and your broker or your banker or whoever's handling your IRA. So our two experts who are truly, I mean, they are experts. I mean, just to read their resume would probably take us 10 minutes right there. And they now have told us how. They told us how to do it, how to do your IRA, why it's so important for tax reasons and legal reasons. And what the archives now is saying is why. And that is, why should you donate to us? And I hope we've explained that well, because of all the work we must do, and there's no way we can stop. Our motto was the first, after our 10-year anniversary, our motto was the first 10 years of forever, because we're in this, we can't quit, and that's kind of the way it is. So where are we, Kathy? Let's see.
I think we're good. We're at time, and we're grateful for everyone who has come here, anyone who listens to the recording afterwards. This will be on our YouTube channel, so check it out. There's lots of great information on our YouTube channel and our website, and the donate button is in the chat if that calls to your heart. So I just want to thank Jim for his dedication to the archives as our president. I want to thank Dr. Marilyn Leo as the founder, and Energizer Bunny, who just keeps us going, for our board members, Dr. Martha, who's here, and we're just been so blessed by everyone and all of you who support us as well. So thank you so much. Keep a lookout for our next seminars. They'll probably be in early 2024. And have a blessed holiday. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.